I'm so glad to see so many faces that I recognize. This whole presentation was talking about not only the 9 stages of program growth and some of the emotions that go along with each of the stages, but the idea that it's a very normal and natural thing to feel afraid in the beginning of a program. And it's something that I experienced. And, when I look back, there was a time in my life in my mid-20s when I wanted to get started with carpentry. And I was so excited about the idea of it, but I kept on thinking about, well, what if I buy the tools and they're so expensive? And what if I don't like carpentry, and I waste that money? And what if I buy beautiful, expensive wood and I make one wrong cut and I ruin it? And it took me 5 or 6 years before I actually got the courage to just buy the first tool, and I started buying some used tools and some cheaper tools, cheaper wood, and I started learning skills. And then little by little, now I'm to a point where most of the furniture in my house is built by me, and I have an enviable tool chest. And so that experience with carpentry is so similar to the way that I started off starting TH programs, and it may be how you guys feel, where you're like, am I ready to get started? Do I have the tools I need? Even people who have a TH certificate sometimes are like, well, I have the education, but am I ready? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I really want to encourage you that, taking that first step is the first step to building confidence. And so as I go through the stages, I'll be discussing my experiences at a state psychiatric hospital and some of the key takeaways that I learned. And keep in mind that this is one of the last of the most complex programs that I built before becoming an educator. So this is what it looks like when you take that first step out and you go through years of building your tool chest, and getting to a place where you realize that, like, okay, I've learned a lot, but no matter how much I learn, there's always still more to learn. So just keep in mind that this is completely based on trajectory that you see there is based on all my own experiences, but it's also something that I've observed in my colleagues, and I've consulted on many, many more programs than just the main large 4 ones that I've created. And these trends were factored into the graph that I created. But it doesn't have to be your progression. Yours may be very different. And, I was starting off when their Root in Nature wasn't around. There was no support. There was no opportunity for me to go to a mentor. And so I just really hope that everybody can appreciate that you're part of this network, and that we can share these experiences together, because that's what you really need in order to be the best practitioner that you can be. So here's my migration pattern as a professional, and you can see I moved around a lot, and that's because, as you all know, it's not easy to find TH or HT jobs, and several in just one state. And I wanted to develop my skills quicker than I would be able to in one state. So I grew up in New Hampshire. I moved all around for different jobs, gaining skills as I went along. And then Vermont, I said, I want to change, and my brother lived in North Carolina, so I started applying for jobs in North Carolina. And one of the jobs that kind of started really standing out to me was at a 400-bed state psychiatric hospital. And so with this particular hospital, well, when you look at the building, first of all, you don't really think about a psychiatric hospital. The architect of this building was only maybe 3 or 4 years old when I started working here. And the architect actually built the whole building around the concept of how light affects mental health. And so 80% of the walls were made out of glass. So it is really kind of a great opportunity to make the gardens a showcase for the whole facility. And because this is a state hospital, anybody who, regardless of financial resources or insurance, is able to come and be treated at this hospital as long as they meet the eligibility criteria, which is that they have proven to be a danger to themselves or others, that they have been diagnosed with a mental illness or more than one, and that they can't be provided treatment safely at a lower level of care. So this was a fully secure, locked facility. And the hospital ultimately served all the way from children to older adults. the whole spectrum of ages. But for the purposes of this presentation, we only worked with the adult population and the older adult population. We didn't work with the children or the teens. So we serve general population, just people like you and me who are having a mental health crisis, who needed support. And then we also served minimum, medium, and maximum security patients. So that, meaning the minimum, medium, and maximum, they had committed a crime as a result of their mental illness and had been deemed not guilty by reason of insanity. They still use those terms actually at this hospital. They needed to receive treatment rather than going to traditional prison. So all of the people, the general population and minimum to maximum security patients were actually all combined into all of the groups that we're going to be talking about right now. So there's a wide range of needs and challenges in these folks. So the position that I applied for in the hospital to begin with was actually for the community living program, CLP, as a community employment specialist. So I've always had a strong interest in vocational treatment, and they didn't have a therapeutic horticulture program at this hospital, but they when I applied for the job and they saw my resume, they saw my HT and TH experience and training, and they got this curiosity moment. They said, wow, we've been looking for somebody who might be able to do this because we think it's a good idea, but we haven't found anybody. We didn't even know how to look. So the fact that I had training and experience really put me ahead of the curve of the other people applying. Normally state hospitals try to hire people from within their own state, but I lived in Vermont. So it was a huge benefit. And I do find all the time that when they see training in TH or HT on your resume, it is absolutely, definitely puts you a cut above the other applicants. So the whole mission of the community living program is they're the transition unit. So they're the team that is supposed to provide vocational training, psychosocial support, and independent living skill training and treatment. So that when the patients get discharged, they can be successful out in the community. There were 30 employees at CLP who were responsible for these duties. And CLP employed 140 patients. Remember, it's a 400-bed hospital, but we could employ up to 140 patients during their time. And we paid the patients minimum wage, which is higher than most kind of facilities like this that you'll ever see. And this was all within a state fund that was available that was paying for this. And they would do jobs that were really needed in the hospital anyways, that we would have had to employ a regular citizen to come in and do it anyways. So things like window washing and laundry and the cafeteria and, like anything that was needed, they would learn how to do that, and then they would get supported employment as they went through. And then they would have a little nest egg of money to use when they got out of the hospital, and also learn the skills that they need to be successful in the community. So the 30 employees of CLP would provide 42 psychosocial groups a day and 20 paid work crews. And we would do everything from maintaining timesheets and do all the payroll, but we also had to document on their progress every single day. Every patient for every group had to be documented in a computerized system. And in order for the patients to get accepted into the community living program, the treatment team had to sign off on it. So they had to meet a certain level of criteria, especially safety criteria, because you're around a lot of dangerous tools and things like that. In laundry, there's chemicals. So this was kind of considered a privilege, and a lot of the patients wanted to be involved in this program. So about 8 months into my time there, the program manager position for CLP came up. And I had a lot of program management experience, and I applied for the job and I got it. Throughout this presentation, I'll be at varying stages of whether I was a community employment specialist or the program manager, but hopefully it'll become a little bit more clear as we move on. So CLP existed under the umbrella of the psychosocial treatment department, and the The psychosocial treatment department was responsible for providing all of the daily treatment groups for the patients and during the day. So this didn't include individual therapy sessions and things like that that psychologists and other social workers would do. This was what patients did at that hospital all day long in order for them to receive funding to remain there. And it was kind of a three branches of psychosocial. You have your clinical treatment services, you see rec therapists, creative expressive arts therapists. All of those folks would manage groups that obviously pertain to their discipline. And then the community living program, we would do all the vocational support, the work crews, and the independent living groups. And then the treatment operations made everything run smoothly and made sure patients were where they were supposed to be and provided safety. So you can see over at CLP, I'm represented amongst one of the 4 supervisors as a TH specific person. And throughout my 5 years there, I was able to add 3 more TH specific people, staff members, which was incredible. And you may wonder, why isn't TH in the clinical treatment services portion? Because that's really where we would fit more when you think about it. But because of the way that this hospital is funded as a state entity, it was very strict about where money could be placed. And the only way that we could continue growing our TH staff was to remain within the CLP program. And since we offered vocational programs as well, we just decided that it wasn't worth fighting that fight. It gave us a lot more freedom. So here's the team. And so eclectic group, just like the folks that are here in the audience right now. Dabney, she was, when she started with us, she was finishing her clinical hours for becoming a licensed professional counselor. Kim had been a physician, actually a nephrologist for her whole career, and then traded her white jacket in to go and get a master's degree in horticulture and made a big career change, and then joined us. And Maria was the activities director of a long-term care home with a TH certificate. And I meant to mention Dabney had an HT certificate as well. So, and then there's me. So a lot of different skill sets that each of us brought to the team. So the way that I didn't have to really work too hard to figure out what the schedule would be for the TH program, because it was already very set in stone. It can be a lot harder to determine a schedule when you're in a setting that doesn't already have such a strict schedule. But in order to make this large hospital run, it had to be set. So there was 4 blocks a day and 45-minute blocks for each. And what I really loved about this hospital was that the patients got to choose their own treatment groups. I've worked in other places where they were just forced and assigned to something, and then of course they resisted it. But in this hospital, they got to choose. What that meant for us was that when people chose a TH specific group, they actually wanted to be there. They had an interest in plants. They wanted to be treated with plants. And so, as you can see, we usually had either 1 or all the way up to 3 groups or work crews going for all of the blocks of the day. And with a team of 4, usually for each group, we had to have at least 2 of us in that group, because you could never be alone. So that's why there are fewer than what we probably could have accommodated if we had just done it alone. So we've gotten to our first stage, curiosity, and this has already been satisfied in our case, because the curiosity moment was the hospital seeing my resume and saying, oh, maybe we could do TH here. And that's kind of how it always happens. I've noticed is either the site has a moment of curiosity, they see that their client is really connecting with plants, and or someone does an activity with plants one time and everybody loves it so much they say, maybe we should do more of this. So they reach out and they try to find a practitioner, or even learn that TH exists at all. On the other hand, it may be the practitioner, a trained practitioner is at a site and says, this is a perfect place for TH. Or it may be a practitioner who goes as a contractor and approaches a site and says, have you ever considered TH? I think this may be a good site for it. And so the moment of curiosity is kind of low emotions because there's no skin in the game yet, right? We're just curious. Then we get to the point of conceptualization, and look, the emotions are rising just a little bit because we're getting excited. This is where the practitioner and the site start to dream together. What's possible, right? I mean, that's like it's such a great moment to get to dream together. And this is where the practitioner educate the site about TH and explain it a little bit more. And then we start the site and participant assessment process to determine, is this even a viable idea? So in my experience, the conceptualization stages usually look like this. Start off with site assessment. So you go around and say, what spaces do I even have available to start a program? What's the site schedule? Can this even fit within the schedule that exists? And then to look around and say, what resources do I have? Are there any tools? Is there support staff? What do I even have to work with? And so that you can determine what you might actually need and whether that's possible. And then looking around at what hazards are present, because administrators and staff who aren't trained in TH, they may not have any idea about what to look for, what would be an unsafe situation for TH. That's where training in TH really comes in, or you could look at the environment and say, well, in order to do TH, we need this environmental hazard, changed and adjusted so that it is safe, because ethically I can't provide TH in this particular setting. And over on the the images that you see, these two sheets, there's just a first sheet of a several page document. They're available in Root and Nature's resource library. So if you're a member, I highly encourage you to go and check them out. And by all means, you can always adapt these and change these forms to be whatever you need them to be for your site. But it always is helpful to be able to kind of have a checklist of what someone experienced like myself has considered and in the past, and then you can add what pertains to your site. And then we go to the participant assessment, where we say, what are their interests? Because obviously we want the program to be relevant and enjoyable, otherwise no one's going to come. And then most importantly, the thing that every program should be designed around, which is the needs and the goals of the participants. So that's going to determine what activities we choose, how long our sessions are, all kinds of things. And then from there, now that we see what we have in the site, we see who we're working with, we move to developing what we think the program could look like, and whether there are environmental changes, such as designing gardens, that need to be done. And when we determine that, then we know that then we can put a budget together, work with the site to put a budget together, propose it, and secure funds, or learn that there aren't enough funds to do various elements that you'd like. So my process with the hospital, starting off at site assessment, was looking, what do I have to work with? And the layout was a huge consideration in the hospital. The hospital has 4 levels, and it's kind of built on a hill. And this was the main level that we worked on. And so you can see on the top, that's all the living units where the patients lived and had their bedrooms and their, like a living room for all the staff, for all the patients to get together and hang out. And then on the bottom portion was the treatment mall. This is where, in the orange areas, you can see those are the classrooms where the groups would occur. And so in the mornings, all the patients would filter out from the living units onto Main Street, which is a big wide hall, and they would come into the treatment mall and we would provide groups. And the squares with the pictures of the flowers are open air courtyards that kind of separate all of the different classrooms. So this is completely surrounded by building, 2 stories high, so there's no elopement risk, a great safe environment, which was helpful. And also made it so you could grow a lot of things you couldn't in other places, because the reflective heat of the walls really made it so that you could grow some cool tropical stuff. And each of the courtyards were named after different flowers. And that wasn't my choice. That was by design originally of the building. So Sunflower Courtyard, right outside in Main Street, before you come into the courtyard, there'd be a tile mosaic of a sunflower, so that it would orient patients to say, okay, I'm in front of Sunflower Courtyard, because everything kind of looked the same in the hospital. So this helped orient them. The dog would be on the floor, and the tulips would. And one of the main issues with this setup is that, as you can see near the medical clinic, the red arrow going into tulip, that was literally the only place that you could get materials into the building. I'm telling you, for real. And so if you wanted to get something to sunflower, you had to go through this gate, you had to go through tulip, you had to walk out onto Main Street of a psychiatric hospital and schlep things down the hallway, as you can see Dabney in the top right corner with a wheelbarrow full of transplanted elephant ears, walking down the hall of a psychiatric hospital. Definitely not, they hadn't considered this in the design. So it was it could be very physically demanding, of course. And then not to mention down on the bottom left, you see this picture of the trash cans and the flatbed. Because it was built on a hill, all of the topsoil had been scraped away. So what you had left was hard as concrete cement that was basically filled with construction materials like glass and metal and trash. And so when we went to go renovate the courtyards eventually, which I'll show you, we actually had to hand dig, because you couldn't get any kind of machinery in there. There's no way. We'd have to hand dig 12 inches down, put it into the trash can on the flatbed, pull it ourselves down all the way down the hallway, put it onto a truck, bring it and dump it, go fill up good soil into the bins, bring it back, shove it all the way back down to sunflower, into dogwood, into tulip, and refill what we had just taken out immediately because we couldn't leave a hole for the patients to fall into. So we basically incrementally had to do these little sections and the shortest amount of times in the morning that you can imagine before patients came out because it was too dangerous otherwise. So, you know, what I'm saying is where there is a will, there is a way. And I encourage you, maybe this is a little excessive for some people, but for me, the biggest thing I'm proud of is that we left a lasting legacy of beautiful soil at that hospital that nobody can take away from us or from the patients at this point. So, and lastly, we've got the future greenhouse site, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but luckily that wasn't in the building. That was in a gated area that would have been actually appropriate to get materials in and out of. So another part of the site assessment here, so here's Sunflower Courtyard on the right and Tulip Courtyard on the left, just a small part of Tulip Courtyard. They had already installed some raised beds there actually before I got there in anticipation. And you can kind of see the call out image of the corner of the raised bed. This was a requirement that they had to do. They actually kind of cut a dog-eared edge onto the raised bed. And this was to reduce the risk of the ligature risks, because if someone were to put a piece of rope or something around the corner, it would be much harder to stay there rather than just slipping down with the weight of a person. And I know it's kind of a morbid thing to talk about, but it's definitely something that we had to consider, even though there were high levels of supervision in these areas. But luckily, because it was a psychiatric hospital, there really weren't a ton of hazards that we had to worry about because they had already thought about a lot of them. Another thing we could not do is we couldn't use any trellises, plant stakes, or any kind of rope or string. So, that changed our plant selections quite a bit. Growing tomatoes without a trellis or stakes is pretty tough. So that was another thing I kind of checked away in my mind, like, okay, we're gonna have to think about that. And we knew for certain we'd need a strong tool check in and out system. So we knew how many shovels went out, how many came in, who brought them out. Because if there was a shovel left in one of these courtyards, then the admin wanted to know immediately who was responsible for that. Across the hospital, we had a building. This was actually where my department, our office buildings were, because the hospital was too small to house the offices of all the staff. But it was an old 1950s military barracks. So it was an old building, and as such, very inconsistent heating and cooling. And so not a very good place to grow plants, but it was something that it was a place that we had. So there was very little light, and you can kind of see the workroom here on the left-hand side. And because there was so little light, luckily before I got there, they had purchased light benches so that we could grow some things that needed light. And one of the limitations of this area was that because it was barracks, basically all the rooms where the plants were in were like the bedrooms of the service members. So we had to do a lot of checks going through each continually, because a patient could be in here alone, and with the light sockets and you know, extension cords, all kinds of materials that were dangerous. We needed to be very vigilant, obviously, but in order to be part of the crew that you'll see later involving this, they had to have a very high security clearance to do this. Another thing that we had was right outside of the Army barracks, was a unused greenhouse, very small but unused, and a compost station and a blank cement pad. And this area had very low hazards ultimately, but in order to get there, you had to leave the secure building and walk to the secure courtyard. So in that one little moment, we had to make sure we had radios and everything in case there was an elopement, and there was a protocol in place if that were to occur. Luckily, it never did, and never has since that I know of. So that we determined what we had for the site. That's what I have to start with. Now, participant assessment. I got the high-level assessment from the clinical director. I asked, like, what are you seeing? What are the trends with the patients that we're treating? I got the mid-level assessment from the group leaders themselves, since I was so new. Excuse me. I wanted to know what they were seeing on the ground so that I had a realistic idea. And then, of course, I could review treatment records, and I did an extensive orientation where I had to shadow a lot of groups. And at that moment, that was great, because I really got to just have the discussions with patients and see for myself who these people were, so that I could determine what kind of safety precautions I needed to take and how I could design activities that would meet the needs and limitations of the patients. So I identified goals that were a theme across all levels of the assessment methods, was, you know, things that we could all probably imagine: improved coping skills, reduce anxiety and depression, getting a better understanding of the diagnosis, because a lot of people with schizophrenia just don't understand how important medication adherence is. That was a huge target that we had. Communication, independent living skills. And a huge one is just increased connection with peers in the community, because a lot of these people had been so alienated, and a lot of them have been unhomed. And so this was a place where we could address a lot of things all at one time. So then I decided, I said, where can I put my energy at first, where it's going to have the biggest impact? Because I don't want to just I don't want to just benefit the people who are going to be in my groups. I want the whole hospital, all of the patients. Some of the patients stay here in this hospital for the rest of their lives. Others may stay just for 2 months, and most of them stay at least a year. And these courtyards are the only physical outdoor locations that they get to spend any time. And you could see they were pretty stark, right? Like, there was really only like crepe myrtles and weedy grass. And I said, no, this is not gonna happen on my watch. We're gonna change this. And so I put these posters together. Yes, it was like being in 4th grade again. I said, I don't know how to use a computer program to do this, and Canva didn't exist back then. If it did, I certainly didn't know. And so I just used paper and, you know, drew design, like went up onto the top floor and looked down and drew hand scrawled pictures. Didn't have to be fancy. But I got the point across, because I wanted to be able to entice the administrators to say what my vision was for these courtyards. I said that each courtyard would have a different theme. Tulip was going to be engagement, relationship, and exploration. Dogwood courtyard, land and community stewardship. This is where we had all the pollinator gardens and everything. So we could talk about like the impact that the individual has on a community, and how important it is for everybody to be interconnected and contribute and to be able to receive. And the sunflower courtyard was about nutrition and personal health, because it was right next to the cafeteria. So all those big windows I told you about, while they're eating, they're looking out onto these gardens that I'm proposing. And so, you know, a big thing I want to convey is, like, a lot of people have never heard of a sensory garden. They don't know what a cutting garden is or what these things are. And so you need to make a visual for them. No, by any means, look at this. This is not like this $2,000 design that we hired somebody in to do. This is me cutting out paper and putting it onto a poster board. And over here on the left, like, this is me printing out pictures I found on Google and putting it together so that they could see the color scheme I wanted to use for a bed so that they'd approve the funding for it. It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be expensive. Just help people visualize your plan, because if they do not see it, it does not exist to them. I can guarantee you that, unless you're the lucky person to get an administrator who's actually an avid gardener. Now we got to budget. How in the world am I going to fund this whole courtyard overhaul, let alone all of the other programming that I want to start at this hospital? So over here is just a representative of some perennials that I would want to plant in the courtyard. And because of my long experience as a professional horticulturist, I have a really deep knowledge of how to purchase plants and how to get the best bang for your buck. And it's something I really want to teach in the Growth Network and do more events where I go really a deep dive into this. So I'm not going to go too far in. We just don't have the time for it today. But I will tell you the main overview of this. Basically, wholesale perennials, the issue is that you have to buy, you usually can only buy one flat, a whole flat at a time. You can't just buy 9 of 4 bee balms, right? You have to buy 18. And usually you don't need that many as a TH program. So what I do, what I've done throughout my career, is I overbuy, but I get it at wholesale. So for $1.53, I can get a 4-inch bee balm. But if I get 2 flats of them, I only need 15 for the courtyard, so I've got 21 remaining. I know that at this hospital, there's 1,800 staff. 1,800 staff. And so all of those are paying customers, and they're people who work a lot, and they want gifts. They don't always have time to stop and get a gift because they're working all hours of the day. So if I have a plant sale and I strategically place these, then I can really get, make some money to support the needs of the program. So for $618, I'm getting 149 plants. That's awesome. When you combine the two, for the courtyards and the remaining for the sale, it's a lot of plants for $618, and that may look like a lot, but if you present it in the right way, you're always going to get them to say yes. I've never had someone say no yet. So our total cost is $618. If you sell all of the ones that you have remaining for the sale, you just grow them up to one size larger, a 4-inch to a 6-inch or to a 1 gallon. You make $1,000, but of course there was expense to buy them. When you take that away, my profit was $721. So I made more than I spent. And then that money not only makes it look really good to the administrators that I could do that, and they have more faith in me and they're willing to put more money into my hand later. But now I can take this and I can go buy soil, I can buy mulch, I can buy cooler plants, indoor plants, whatever I need. So we get to our stage 3. How could you not be excited? I mean, I know I'm biased, but like just even talking about this makes me remember the flood of chemicals, the dopamine, the oxytocin that I was feeling, where I'm like, the world is my oyster. We're going to do this, right? We can get this done. And so it's our highest emotional peak. We're way up there, and we're just like, yes. And the site is so excited. They're visualizing what I'm hoping to do. It's our highest moment of hope. And then also the patients are starting to get excited because they know that all of this is just going to continue growing, and they're going to get to benefit from it. You really want to hold on to the honeymoon, because as you can see, we're getting ready for a little bit of a valley moment, right? Going down like to this managing expectations, that's okay. This is a really important part of the program development process, and it is definitely one of the most skipped steps. And it's not skipped because of anybody's fault. It's usually skipped because of inexperience, or even for someone like me who is extremely experienced by the time I did this program. You just don't know what you do not know. I had never started a program at a state psychiatric hospital. I'd started one in a high security treatment facility that was a little more like a prison, but I had never done it here. So I really want to impart to you guys, like, don't beat yourself up when you don't know what you don't know. You will not know until you know. So don't let that be the thing that holds you up. because if I let that paralyze me, I never would have the furniture I have in my house. I would never have this presentation to show you. So, at this moment, you just do your best. And this is also where you can reach out to Root in Nature, to your peers, to me, to the community, and say, I'm not sure what kind of expectations to talk about, manage with them in this particular situation. So lean on us, lean on each other at this moment, because if you do a good job at this step, you can really avoid going all the way down to the disillusionment stage that we'll see in a minute. So some of the managing like the discussion points that I encourage you to consider, and something that I always try to consider, but still always forget something, it's inevitable, is the mission and long-term goals of the program, the money needed to start and sustain the program, not just to start, but it's easy to just say this is the money we need, but like plants require continued cost, right? Water, soil, bigger pots as you transplant up, because you can't keep them in one forever. You need to really think about that and make sure the site understands that. Environmental adaptations, what's going to be needed, and what are you, as a professional, ethically, need to convey to the site what you are and you are not willing to accept in terms of the accessibility that you have and don't have. The types of support you need from support staff and admin, the time required for TH session preparation, which, a 45-minute session does not take 45 minutes. It takes at least 3 hours when you really think about it, especially if you're the one growing the plants for the session. You're the one cleaning up, you're the one having to plan it, you're the one documenting afterwards, potentially, if that's part of your program. It is a lot more than just a 45-minute session, and a lot of sites don't understand that. And then there's the additional duties, the seasonal factors. Your workload always increases in spring and fall if you have outdoor gardens. It's just part of gardening. And then the outcomes that can be expected and not expected. So sometimes the site will think that you can accomplish miracles, and you need to say what miracles you can accomplish and which ones are not going to happen. So for me, the hospital set expectations for me, and I said, okay, I think I can accept that. And then we set some benchmarks. So what the hospital expected was that I would do no more than 4 TH related groups a day, that they'd provided the initial materials budget to get started, and that I in turn would invest that money and grow it so that it could become a sustainable program. And then they said that after I make it a sustainable program, then I could use any income that I bring after that to continue growing the program. That's nice. I like that. And then they had the greenhouse that I mentioned to you. They said they wanted to get installed within a year because they had a fund for that already sitting there. Some patients, their parents put a fund together. And then the plan was for me to replace the unfavorable indoor growing ward with the greenhouse, and that we'd hire and train new staff. So they said that if I overhauled the courtyards, made the program self-sustaining, got the new staff, and maintained my supervisory role as a program manager at this point of 10 to 15 staff, which is quite a bit, and all the operations of all of the 62 CLP groups that are being run a day, that they would increase my pay, and they would decrease the amount of group facilitation that I needed to do so that I could actually focus on the program in the way that I needed to. So I was okay with that, and I decided to go forward. So now we get to stage 5, pedal to the metal. And when I mean pedal to the metal, I'll tell you, like, unfortunately, you can't really avoid putting the pedal to the metal. You can avoid it a little bit by being really proactive about about the way that you organize yourself and anticipate the spring season or the fall season. But in this situation, I was coming in right in the middle or end of spring. So I had to get plants into the ground if I wanted to do any programming with them throughout the year. So this is when you actually, you're going to do it. You've been talking about it, now you're going to do it. And it's the most physically demanding stage. And what a lot of people don't understand is that if you are the one doing a lot of the physical labor, you know, my peers, the people in CLP, they weren't doing any kind of physical labor beyond what each of them, like the average of what that role was designed for. I was probably doing 3 times more physical work, but still getting paid the same amount as everybody else. And so you don't realize just how much that can actually wear down on you emotionally and intellectually to be so physically tired. But you still have some of those chemicals running through you from the honeymoon. So you have a little bit more ability to say, you know, I know this is hard, but I can get through this. I was able to add an additional staff member. This is when Kim came onto the team. All of the stuff beforehand I had to do alone and while I was doing my other job with no extra pay, which is common, but I promise you that it is worth it when the sacrifice is usually always worth it. So the treatment groups that we did, but beyond just the work crews, we did two adult treatment groups. They either did Tuesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all year long. We did these in the classrooms and started off in the classrooms and usually always went out into the tulip courtyard to do some hands-on stuff with plants. And then one older adult group. And with this one, there were so many mobility concerns and safety concerns with the senior patients that we would actually go out onto their living unit and do TH sessions in their living room area. And then when they were able, we would walk across the main street and go into the tulip courtyard so that they could sit and look at the plants. Because of because of the nature of their mental health and physical concerns, we only did this group in spring and summer. You know, all throughout with all these groups, we did some just standard indoor and outdoor TH activities, which I know a lot of you already kind of know what those are, so I won't go into too much detail with that. But then we had the vocational treatment groups. And so the first one was called the Courtyard Worker Crew, and we had 6 paid patient employees here. They worked from 8:30 to 9:30 Monday through Friday. And this one was only March through November, since it did require outdoor work, and so they got to take a break during the winter. But look at these pictures. Look at the before and after. I mean, talk about like a mental health boost right there. The patients grew almost every single one of these plants themselves. They planted them, they watered them, they tended them all year long, and did a fabulous job. Take a look at this one, Sunflower Courtyard. Can you believe this? I'm telling you, they grew every single one of those. Those zinnias down there, they grew those from seeds. That one large, the tallest circular thing, that whole bed right there only cost us $300 to do the whole thing. Because we were so strategic about our propagation methods and growing from seed and buying wholesale. And a lot of those are perennials, so they just came back every year, of course. So just wanted to kind of show you like the power. And this Courtyard Worker Crew was a very coveted crew, and they walked down the main street like rock stars. Everybody was like just so impressed by their work, and they'd tell everybody about the plants, and it was beautiful to see. Across the street at the barracks area, the grounds crew, we had 5 patient employees in the grounds crew, and they worked actually the first 2 blocks of the day, so they got paid a lot more than other patients. So this was a very coveted position as well, Monday through Friday, all year long. And their main responsibilities were to take care of the outdoor plant nursery. So on the right hand side, you remember I said there was an empty cement pad? Well, it isn't empty anymore, and it still isn't to this day. But after a plant sale, I'll tell you that almost that entire stock will be gone in one plant sale. So they maintained the outdoor plant nursery and did outdoor plant propagation and indoor plant propagation. And they also took care of the vegetable garden we started on the left. But they would also help go inside, because they were the first half of the day, it was always cooler outside. So they took the outdoor tasks the majority of the time, but whenever it got warm or they ran out of things to do out there, they could go to the indoor ward and do anything that the next crew will talk about didn't get to do. But the grounds crew, like I said, did propagation. We did tip cuttings. You've got your mother stock plant with the Cuban oregano up here and all their little babies. And I mean, all of those plants will grow so fast and will be the size of their mother in no time at all. And we can sell those for a much higher price than those little 2.5 inches that they're in. We did water cuttings. Over here on the left-hand side, these are unrooted tip cuttings of high quality succulents. This is not wholesale, everybody. There's a place called Simply Succulents where you can mail order tip cuttings and then just plop them into 2.5-inch pots there, like you can see, and they grow roots, and then you get these very expensive succulents for a very low cost. It's $25 for 50 tip cuttings. And I could grow each of those up to be at least $4, if not, 6 or 12 or even 15 if I put a few together. Then you can see the little spider plant I'm holding. Those are rooted plugs that you can get for wholesale. If you find a good vendor, you can, it's a 72-inch cell tray. You can find a vendor who will actually split the tray with 2 different varieties, sometimes 3. Because, again, 72 plants, that's a lot of plants of one variety. But if you have a big plant sale, that's one thing. So these are awesome. I highly recommend thinking about plugs because you don't have to wait for them to root, and you just throw them into a 4-inch pot. Well, gently plant them lovingly and therapeutically into a 4-inch pot. And this one tray is exponentially expanded into 4 or 5 whole flats that can be grown up in each of these plants, sold for between $5 and $12 a piece. And one of those flats of rooted plugs, I think, was probably about 30 or 40 bucks. And then we had landscape, you can get landscape plugs. You can see they're much larger than the indoor plant, but someone donated landscape plugs to us, about $1,500 worth. And we could put them right into a 1 gallon and grow all these gorgeous varieties of ornamental grasses, but we could also use them in the courtyards for our designs. And then this canna musifolia over on the right-hand side, this is those really tall cannas you saw in sunflower that get to be 8 to 10 feet tall in one growing season, with beautiful red leaves. One little cluster right there cost me $12. I planted that one little guy in the ground, and I got the mama cluster that you see there, and then I split them all with the patients into this, and now I can sell each of those for more than $12 once they leaf out in the spring, because now that everybody's seen them in the courtyards, they all want a piece of it. So it's always a good calling card, is to sell the things that they see and love in the gardens that you're growing. So then we get to horticulture care crew, and we had 8 patient employees in this one, and they got to work the whole second half of the day for 2 blocks, and all year long. And their main responsibility was taking care of all of the indoor plants in the ward and getting ready for plant sales and doing value-added products. And if they got finished with their tasks and the grounds crew hadn't gotten everything done outside, the nursery and everything, then they could go outside and they could work on those things. So it's good to have a little overlap with the 2 crews, because if a patient wasn't there and we didn't get as much done as we needed, we could always have the other crew finish off where the other started. That was really nice. So between the grounds crew and horticulture care crew, look at these plant sales. Outdoor plant sales, indoor plant sales. There's the Valentine's Day on the right. We had the carpentry department in the hospital build these boxes because we just never could have enough tables to fill it all, to put all of our plants out. And besides the plant sales, a lot of everything we planted in the courtyards each year were usually by our patients as well, like I said. So we usually always put our plant sales around holidays because we knew that that's when people needed to buy things and wanted to. And so we started off just with regular pots and production pots because, honestly, just because I had never really had to think about things like this before. I hadn't really worked a lot with indoor plants even before this. I learned all of what I know about indoor plants during this job. I didn't need to know anything about them before because every other program I had done was exclusively outside. So this was a learning process for me too. And so the first year, the plant sale, everyone thought it was amazing. But, when I look now at what we were able to achieve, I think, wow, we really learned. And what we learned was that plants are great, but when you stick a little scarecrow into one, it immediately increases the price. Look at the little Santa Claus belts. We actually had art therapy groups were creating pots for us because they just wanted to, and then we could plant things in them. And so for a little 50 cent embellishment, or a $1.15 basket that we could drop the production pot into, we could get sometimes twice the amount that we could charge for the plant in the production pot. So you can see over on the right hand side some of the things. We bought all these things in wholesale as well. And because we only used certain size production pots, we only had 4 sizes that we only ever used. And then we always knew that anything that we bought for embellishments had to fit those 4 sizes. It allowed us to be able to buy wholesale because we knew we would have the numbers that we needed to actually do something with each product. Here's some of the value-added products that horticulture care focused a lot on. You see that display, the carpentry department made that for us too. I actually designed it and then they built it for us because those wings can fold in and be locked so that you can push it all the way through the hospital if you want, or set up the display and let the patient set up the display, close it, and then bring it to the sale. And we created a lot of, throughout the whole year, the courtyard crew would see different flowers that could be pressed and they would give them to me and I'd bring them over to horticulture care and the grounds crew to press all throughout the year, so that in the slow season in winter, this is when the value added product operation really got revved up. So they would have tons of different dried flowers to make pressed flower cards. The round things that you see there are actually magnets with flowers pressed onto them. And that's just rounds of a branch that I found in the woods and cut on a miter saw. We would go into the rec and art therapy group rooms, and they had all kinds of like scrap cuttings of construction paper and stuff. And so we would gather all of this stuff and all those scraps and recycle them by making our own paper out of the scraps. And so we could make note cards, we could make seed paper, we could make gift tags, as you can kind of see there. And then one of the patients said, well, we could make these look so much prettier. What if we just got a little bit of burlap and some twine, we could make them look like boutique-y. And then, somebody said, well, what if we had a cool a tag? And then I said, well, what if we got this handmade product from the patients of the hospital, like stamp. And so down on the bottom right, you can kind of see for $20, $25, now you can just stamp that on each one and it makes it look so professional. And we did herb blends, herb tea blends, just, the sky's the limit with what you can do with natural products. So now, we accomplished all that. It took us a few years, right? Probably, I don't know, 3 years at that point, 3.5, maybe 4. And we know, we looked and we said, okay, we know where our pain points are now. We can see where what we thought was going to be happening isn't happening, and where things are happening that we hoped would happen. We had a really realistic sense now of like, what kind of support we had from the hospital and what they would say yes or no to with funding, all these things. And this is a really natural part of the process. Everybody has to get to the growing pain stage, because what does pain tell our bodies? It tells us that we need to change something, right? Or that we need an intervention so that we don't have to be in pain anymore. And so, the tone definitely declines a little bit here, because a lot of the times, you have been communicating these pain points as they come up, but you may not be seeing all the changes that you're hoping from the site at this point. And so you're kind of trying to figure out, what am I going to, where does this go from here? And if you find that the site just hasn't been able to satisfy some of the needs that you've really been expressing that you need for your program, then you could go down to a state of disillusionment because you say, are they ever going to change or provide the support I need? But you may be at a site where you don't ever get to a state of disillusionment, because during the growing pains moment, you get to jump right across over to recovery. And you don't need to go down to this low. But, because TH is a fairly young field where not a lot of people know a whole lot about it, a lot of administrators, they don't know how to take your needs seriously. It's not even that they don't want to. They don't understand how different this is from other allied health professions. TH is so season and time dependent, and one little one missed planting session can mean that you don't get to have what you need to create that value-added product that is going to sustain your program financially. And so they don't understand how difficult that is for us to have to balance. And so that's why communication and making sure you're setting that expectation from the start is so important. Oh, I love talking about this stuff. Okay, so the site is wondering if the practitioner will accept the reality of what they can give, and the practitioner wonders whether the site even has an accurate understanding. So at this moment, this is where you reach out to us. This is where you reach out to each other. This is where you reach out to your partner, to your family, to your friend, whoever is that person who can help you summon strength inside of yourself. Because look at where we are here. You already have been at a peak. You already knew that things could be good. And if you look towards this trend that I really do feel is very common, look at the peak that you have yet to reach. This is just one moment in your story. And so this is the moment where you decide, do I hold or do I fold? And only you can be the one to decide that. But I really highly encourage you to really assess, at that moment, if I had, if maybe the site will never completely understand what I need right now, but the people in the growth network might, or another colleague that I have who knows about TH might. So at this moment, I had to make a decision for myself. So I went back to my benchmarks. I went back to the expectations, and I needed to look and be realistic with myself. So we'll see, what we can see here is, I thought that I'd just be facilitating the 4 groups when I first started, before I became the program manager. And I usually did 4 groups, but it usually ended up also being that I would have to cover unrelated TH groups, or they would add one on. Even when I became a program manager, I only had to do 1 group a day, but if anybody called out, I would have to fill in. So I definitely held up my side of the bargain, but with the hospital, it's not even necessarily their fault. It just was the way that the cards fell, but they weren't able to 100% hold up their expectation there. They did give me the money, the initial materials budget, and I did make the program sustainable, so that was great. And it's yes and no for supporting the free use of additional income, because in the beginning, they definitely supported me. And that's why I was able to grow the program to what you saw. But right before, right at this moment when I'm assessing, they told me that they were going to be taking all the money that was sitting in the account that we had built and use it to buy a bus for the patients, to contribute to a bus for the patients. And while I completely understood, and it's a state hospital, they need to find the money where they can, it was really disheartening, because we had all kinds of plans of what we wanted to do with that money, and the patients were really invested in it too, because they felt like this was their company at this point. And then to have their fund raided, it felt very violating. The greenhouse never got installed, even though the funds were right there. And the reason is because they wanted to fund a greenhouse that they had chosen before I came, and it didn't have a head house. It just had a greenhouse. So for those of you who don't know what a head house is, it's like this kind of a primitive building, enclosed building that is attached to a greenhouse that is air conditioned and heated so that you can be comfortable and work in there. And you usually do all your work there. You do your seeding, your transplanting, everything, and then this nice climate control. Then you go into the greenhouse for the smallest amount of time that you can, because it's hot and humid and not good for humans, right? Especially humans who take very heavy medications and that don't interact well with sun and with heat. And so I said, well, I would rather have a smaller greenhouse than what you're thinking in order to add a head house. And no matter how hard I tried, they would not budge on that. And so I said, ethically, I cannot, then I don't want a greenhouse. I'll stay in the unfavorable indoor growing ward, as much as it broke my heart. But that was their decision. And then we did support and recruit and hire additional staff. I very much appreciated that. My team was so amazing. They still are. They're still so amazing. So my benchmarks, I overhauled the courtyards. I did everything that they said. I maintained my supervisory roles this whole time. And then at this moment, they said that they would not be increasing my pay or decreasing my group facilitation duties. So obviously that was very disheartening. And I'm not trying to disparage the hospital by any means, because like I said, it's a state hospital. There's so many reasons probably why this was the case, but I just wish they hadn't promised me to begin with. But that was how it was. And so literally right at this moment, when I was trying to decide what to do, I was offered a job at the University of North Carolina to start a TH certificate program for them. And for me, I decided that without increased pay and the ability to actually like have the time I needed to do this and not work 5 times harder than every other human in the department other than my TH team, I would rather put my energy into making sure that this situation doesn't happen again for people like you, for the next generation of practitioners, by teaching this, rather than staying and continuing to kind of get taken advantage of. So I folded, and one of the main reasons why I did was because I knew I had 3 really strong staff that could keep the program going in my absence, and that it was a very valued program in the hospital. If it was on unsteady ground, I don't think I could have done it at that moment. But, you know, if I had decided to stay myself, I would have gone into this recovery stage. And this is actually where most programs go. This wasn't the story for me for this particular thing, but it could be your story. And, you know, it's where you take a look at reality. You take a look and you say, strip it all away. And, you know, we both didn't know what we didn't know. And it's not anyone's fault, but now we're going to look at reality. We are going to assess that, and we're going to decide, what we need to do to move forward together as a team. And, this stage is so much easier when you have managed expectations in step 4. So what are some of the things that I learned and conversations I had wished I had had in hindsight? So these were the original things that I showed in the slide earlier. I realized that I had a much bigger vision for what the TH program could be than the hospital did. And I think they went along with me for a long time because they were excited, but then they got to a place where they just said, it's too much. It's going to be too much if we go any bigger. I wish I had had more of a discussion about that, but I guess I just didn't know how much promise there was in the beginning when I started. And that's no one's fault. You know, how much money is required to maintain current program size? Like, do we need to scale a program down to meet what you can give us financially? Or do you want to give us more so that we can scale it up? And do we even have the staff to scale up or down? You know, a lot of discussions to have there. And in the beginning, you know, I wish I had had more understanding about the greenhouse, and so that I could have explained to them, you know, that I know that you are the supervisors, you're my boss, but there are some things ethically as a trained professional horticultural therapist and therapeutic horticulture practitioner that I just will not do. Just because you tell me to, I'm not going to put patients at risk, and I want to be respectful, but I just can't do what you're asking me to. And the type of support needed. You know, the biggest thing I faced with this is that I saw that there was a lot of inconsistency with the support staff. Sometimes the unit staff would bring them patients to our groups 15 or 20 minutes late sometimes. And that would really cut into what we were going to do that day. And if it was a hot day and we needed to get all 3 of those courtyards watered by hand, It meant that we didn't get it done with the patients, and then each of us had to run to a group for the next block, and then we couldn't water. And so then at the very end of the day, when you're exhausted, you have to run back to that courtyard and water that as fast as you can. And it's like I say on the slide, it's like turning a cruise ship, not a canoe. One little inconsistency can derail everything in your day and in your week and your year. And so they need to understand that. What can you realistically provide now that you understand that that's non-negotiable? Like I said before, I wish I'd been more clear about just how much energy a session can take, just because when you're growing and maintaining plants that you're going to be using for programming, it's a lot more. And then thinking about the non-session hours. In order to have gardens, you have to design gardens or find somebody who can design gardens. You have to find money to buy the plants. You have to find a vendor. You have to put in an order. You have to receive the order. You have to then go plant the plant. When you think about what's happening outside of session hours with a program such as I'm describing, it's a lot of out of session hours. And so really talking to people about what that looks like, and making sure that when you're pricing something or you're entering into a contract with somebody, that you're not just charging for a 60-minute TH session, that you're charging for all of the administrative costs that kind of above and beyond that, because your time is really valuable and you're providing a high quality service and you deserve to get paid fairly. And then, the outcomes that can and cannot be expected. Basically for me, they wanted beautiful gardens. They wanted safety at like the highest level of safety. They wanted all of these things, but I don't think that they realized that the only way to maintain that is to give us out of session admin hours, is to be more consistent at clutch moments when we really need things to happen very seamlessly, so that we can keep up with our program. And so we come to our last of the reliable stages. I love this definition of equilibrium: a state of rest or balance due to the equal action of opposing forces. Isn't that beautiful? You're both basically mutually moving forward with something, and as a result you're balancing it. That's what collaboration is to me. And so a new norm has been created. So take a chance to grieve your losses. This is where I would have need to really grieve, like the promises that were made that I felt were broken. I would have to let that go, because we're at a point of equilibrium. We're ready to go into this healthy new spot in our relationship. And take a minute. This is the sweet spot. This is what you literally started this whole program for, to get to equilibrium, to get to this place where you've really arrived. You've learned so much. And so take a minute to celebrate the joint accomplishments that you've created with the staff and with the participants, because that celebration, just like the honeymoon, this celebration is going to continue carrying you too, and help you heal from any growing pains and hurts that you received along the way. So these aren't formal stages, but I just wanted to show how a forward trajectory might go, and which is pretty common if you are lucky enough to reach equilibrium, is that you're going to get to coast. You can coast with what you've created for a while. You could coast there forever if you want, really, but there may be new honeymoons on your horizon, as you build capacity now with your new experiences. You may have a new project you want to take on, and you get to go. But as you see, it's a 10 and not a 12, like the honeymoon over the first honeymoon. You'll probably never get back up to that high 12 honeymoon, but that's not a bad thing, because that original honeymoon wasn't even it was a chemical induced honeymoon. It wasn't an actual real honeymoon. A 10 honeymoon is what we want to shoot for next time, right? And so the key takeaways: don't forget to manage expectations. And like I said, this is where you reach out to people who have done it. If you haven't done it before, if you want to try to make sure you don't forget things like I did. I did not have support at that time. I wish I had root in nature at that time, but it didn't exist then. When you get to disillusionment, find support. please find support. Don't give up until you've really tried, because I promise you, you are going to be so glad to get to a state of equilibrium. And again, make time to celebrate your accomplishments. You know, that is really important. It's going to carry you through those springs and those falls when you are carrying plants and you are sweating and having to go into a meeting, into a treatment team meeting, or into a, you know, into a group with the community members, and you look like you've been, you know, in a fight with a wild cat, which is what I pretty much look like half the time. And to say, you know, no, let's celebrate. And then most importantly, my last point is remember that the trend line always trends upwards. It's the average of all the peaks and the valleys, and so I really encourage you to just to stay strong and find support, and really look forward to hearing how all of you, you know, hopefully you'll share with us in the Growth Network. If you do start your programs that you're hoping to, or if you need support along the way of the ones you have started. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Emilee. That was an amazing presentation. I